Doug DeMuro needs very little introduction, if any at all, and I was thrilled to host him on the show. We chat Countach ownership, the early days of his career, starting cars and bids, and I ask what his advice would be for collectors, what his favorite quirks are, as well as a few of his interests not many know about. Please enjoy my conversation with Doug DeMuro. I'm your host, Wesley Smith, and you're listening to the Standard Age Podcast. We can get right into it. I am at my parents' house in North Carolina, and so I am not the collector of these Starbucks mugs.
But they are.
Shout out mom and dad. Well, listen, I wanted to jump right in just because of the Countach acquisition and kind of get a little better understanding as to what ownership is like. That car was on so many of our walls as children, and it's
Right.
like, it's got to be such a fantastic, hysterical event.
Yeah, no, it is. It's actually been a really, really interesting experience so far because every car that I buy, people have a certain thing that they say. Like every person, like if you have a DeLorean, everybody walks up to you and talks about Back to the Future.
Right.
The Countach, the Carrera GT, everybody walks up to you and says, "Oh my God, isn't that the scariest car? You're going to die in that thing."
Paul Walker. Yeah.
Right, Paul Walker. Every car has I've noticed has like a thing people say. And for the Countach, isn't it terrible to drive? And and I think, at the time it probably was, but these days, in my opinion, cars have gotten so sanitized.
Mm-hmm.
The Ferrari 488s and McLaren S720Ss of the world that are automatics with a backup camera and Bluetooth, and it's just easy.
Right.
Like I specifically wanted this experience. Like I wanted to hear that engine and smell that fuel and all the exhaust. And like that was literally what I was searching for. And so to that end, it's been absolutely fantastic. I think what people don't understand is that like the thing that makes that car great is it's not great in spite of that driving experience. We've aged to a point where it's great because of
it, yeah.
Horrible driving experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, traction control's one thing, but yeah, there's all the
Right.
new cars.
That's exactly right. People talk about analog cars being like traction control. This is an analog car and every like that. I tell my passengers, like my wife rode in it the other day, and I was like, when we come up to a stop, I was like, try to move the steering wheel. And you can't because manual. And she's like, what the hell is this thing? And I'm like, yeah, that's what we're talking. That is an analog car.
So it doubles as a gym, you get a workout. And,
you do. You do. Getting in and out, shifting gears even is hard. There's no like simple, it's like kind of in the clutch is heavy. I mean, everything about it is like hard.
Wow. 400-pound gorilla on your back.
But in the most wonderful way possible. Like people are like, I can't believe you did this. And it's like, I've driven everything. Do you think I did this by mistake? Right. This was a very intentional decision based on where I'm seeing cars start to go. I love the Rimac Navara. It's incredibly cool. But like, if that's our future, like electric 1,000 horsepower cars, I'm here for it. I love fast cars. I think that's amazing. But like personally, I'm going to go in this direction instead.
Okay, so I wasn't even going to talk about this, but you just mentioned this, and that harkens back to something I heard you say recently about the like democratization of speed, right? Like everybody gets it, and I couldn't agree with you more. So I think there's going to be this thirst, this appetite for, if nothing else, just my car doesn't look like yours, and that excites me,
Right.
And I've always wondered like why these current manufacturers, Porsche, whoever, right? Lamborghini, there is such a strong subset of people like us, I guess I should say, that are totally stoked on these kinds of cars. So why not just do a modern day lightweight 250 horsepower with a 5-speed in it and do it on a limited number and make it outrageously expensive because they're going to sell.
I mean, I would argue that Porsche kind of has. It's not lightweight like you're thinking, but Porsche was it's going to be widely reported if it's not already that Porsche was pretty much on the verge of canceling the manual transmission entirely. When the 991 came out, the PDK was clearly what they were going to do, and then they came out with this car called the 911R that had this big effect on the market, and it convinced people at Porsche that maybe the manual's not dead yet, and maybe these enthusiasts, these crazy people who are paying extra to go slower, like are worth catering to. And now they've made a great business of doing that. And I agree that Ferrari and Lamborghini should. If I were Lamborghini and Ferrari, I would sit here and be like, hey, people are paying $1 million for Countachs, $3 million for Miuras. Maybe we should capitalize on some of that. And I think they're insane not to have. But there's that little Alpine. There's various cars that kind of have to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard. It's hard to get all that stuff certified for sale with regulations and that kind of thing. But a manual version of a car like the Huracan for 1,000 people and you charge triple, that would definitely pay for the cost of that manual. And I think that it would find a lot of buyers. And Porsche is proving that with cars like the 911 ST.
Yeah, the ST. Yeah. Interesting. What's the most common question you get when people recognize you?
The first thing people say exclusively is, I didn't realize you were this tall, which I find funny because I always make a big thing about how tall I am in the videos because of how I fit in the cars.
Right.
And then people, if I'm somewhere, people will say, what car did you drive today? And they're always disappointed to find out the answer is almost invariably my station wagon, my Mercedes station wagon, which is a normal car.
Right.
But what do people always ask, like, what's new, what cars you do and what's coming, that kind of thing. It's interesting because a lot of people recognize me, but not everybody who recognizes me follows along closely. And so sometimes they'll ask questions like, I'll be with the Countach, are you reviewing this? It's like, no, I bought this.
Right.
But you can't expect everybody to watch every video. So it's like, you kind of have to do some educating in public, which is always kind of funny.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, totally. What was the first album you ever bought with your own money?
Music. The first album of music? Probably Gold by Ryan Adams.
Oh.
White Ladder by David Gray. So it was in 2001. It was one of those like one of those, definitely. And I still listen to that stuff 25 years later.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's good. It's timeless. You know what I mean?
I guess.
No, it 100% is. I think David Gray was doing like a 25-year tour, like a 25 celebratory.
That's he did, and I missed it, and it was the saddest thing ever. I'm like David Gray's biggest fan. There's no one else in the world who's like a big fan of David Gray. So if you don't know, he did the song Babylon. That was like his popular song, and please forgive me. But I am obsessed with that album. I think that album, he wrote that album in his bedroom, and it became one of the highest selling albums in the history of the UK.
It was so amazing.
I view that as an example of like the little guy can still win. He's up there higher than Adele on these charts and higher than, some of the Beatles albums. And it's like, so I'm obsessed with that. And yes, he did the 25-year tour last year and I missed it. And I was so disappointed in myself, but I'll catch him next time.
You know what? Actually, the only place I've seen him live is in Denver.
No way.
Yeah.
So where? Anyway. Red Rocks?
No, it was somewhere downtown, like a theater house or like a, opera house, not opera house, or whatever the theater is down there. Yeah, that's funny. Your first car, I believe, was a Volvo 850, right?
Volvo 850. Trash.
So what are your thoughts on current production models?
Of Volvos?
Yeah.
I think Volvo makes great cars. It's kind of funny because Volvo's like this in-between brand of like, it's a luxury car, but it doesn't have that luxury image. So like if you don't want to drive around on a Land Rover and like everybody thinks you're a jerk, or a Mercedes, you get a Volvo and you get all the benefits. And they're beautiful. Volvo, since that car was not beautiful, that 850, but 2001 they came out with the S60 that was like remember when we were kids, Volvo was viewed as boxy. That was what everybody would say about Volvo, and no one has said that in 20 years about Volvos, right? But it was 2001 they came out with this like sloping S60 and it was a gorgeous car, and every Volvo since then has been beautiful, and including all SUVs. They're the only ones who know how to make like really beautiful SUVs. And
they're hardly ever product placements in movies, but I think, was it The Saint with Val Kilmer?
Val Kilmer drove a C70, which was laughable. That's only because the original Saint movie, they had a P1800, which was correct at the time. That was a true sports car. Val Kilmer shouldn't have been driving around in that front-wheel drive trash C70, but it was what they had.
Also a good album, I would argue. Soundtrack.
Oh, is it? Interesting.
Yeah, it's a little more electronic, but that's really funny.
Nobody ever asked me about music. I am a top 99% Spotify listener. I'm obsessed with music. And it annoys me actually because Spotify, I think the only people who are the 1% above me are like gas stations who leave it on all day, and that just, shouldn't count.
Right. They didn't get the Muzak subscriptions, so they just throw on.
I was actually, it's funny. I went into a CVS the other day and Smooth by Santana and Rob Thomas was playing. And that's
Epic.
just right. That song is playing in every CVS in America. And that's the only place it ever plays. And in my mind, that's like correct. Like
Right.
you're in a CVS, you should be hearing Smooth by Santana.
100%. Yeah, totally. Well, you're from Denver. So how did you settle on Emory University?
Yeah, so I went to a college at Emory in Atlanta. I wanted to go to a good school in a big city,
Okay.
and it was always kind of ingrained in me throughout childhood that I would go east for college. I there's not a lot of really great excuse me, really great colleges in the West generally. There's some in California, but like I didn't want to go to the University of Colorado. All my high school friends went there and all that, and so I always kind of figured I'd go east. And so Atlanta, Emory was a good school in a big city, and I got in. And I loved it, and I love Atlanta more than anything in the world. And if I could move back to Atlanta tomorrow, I would. But my wife has put a stop to that for a lot of reasons. So we're here in California.
Got it. Got it. Interesting. Well, I know your first gig was at Porsche. Forgive me if I'm wrong. Allocation manager?
Yeah, I was responsible for allocating the cars to the dealership. So like choosing, not, it was a formula mostly that did it, but there were a lot of nuances, and I would choose like which cars went to which dealer basically. And that was in an interesting time for Porsche. I started in 2010. Um, and went through 2013. And so like I did a lot of the 918 stuff, which was cool. The manual Cayenne was still around,
Yeah.
997.2, which has become a very desirable car,
Yeah.
GT3 RS 4.0. There were a lot of like special cars that I was like responsible for like handing out. Although back then they weren't as highly desirable and prized as they are now.
Well, that was kind of my question is like, is the wait to get a certain allocation as a customer, right? Like let's say it's 2011 and I'm waiting to get an allocation for my GT3. Um, it, is it due to the aspect of the dealership network only being allowed certain cars, or like how does the allocation thing work
It
if
was
you're
based just like all manufacturers, and in large part by law, it was based on the size of the dealership. So it was like backward looking 12-month sales.
Mhm.
I say by law because this is really a law. A lot of people don't understand, but dealers are really their own business. And so dealers can kind of do whatever the hell they want and are protected in large case by local laws. Most dealers, a lot of dealers themselves are politicians. Dealers are big businesses that employ a lot of people. And so politicians are often trying to cater to car dealerships rather than the manufacturer, which is usually in another state or another country. And the dealer is where and so there's a lot of dealer protectionist laws. And that was one of them. You had to be very careful about allocation. You had to be able to prove that you were allocating cars fairly. You couldn't just hand cars to dealers, but more importantly, you couldn't restrict, because you hated the general manager. You couldn't restrict them from getting cars.
Right.
And so the result of that is, yeah, if you want to get a GT3 allocation, you can pop over to your dealer. But if it's a big dealer, they're going to have a big allocation, but also a big customer base. And they probably won't necessarily they probably already pre-sold those, just like the dealer in Omaha maybe only has one car, but they also pre-sold it because they have that one client. It doesn't necessarily, you can't just call up Champion Porsche, the biggest dealer, or the dealers in LA, and just say, hey, I want a car, because they have the customer base to support their massive allocation typically. Really, what you needed to do was buy a 918. Then you could have had whatever Porsche you wanted.
Right. Right. So was it during this time you working there? Was that when the Carrera GT obsession started, or?
No, I started. I'm actually not like a big Porsche enthusiast, believe it or not.
No, I know.
But I was into the Carrera GT. I saw one years ago, and I was obsessed with it. And I saw one in '05 when it was new, just randomly on the street, and I was obsessed with it. And I have
Okay.
always been obsessed with it ever since. And I like truly believe that it is the greatest sports car ever made, and probably that ever will be made. And that
Mm,
belief is furthered every time I drive mine.
cool.
Uh, by the time I started at Porsche in 10, they were already long gone, and they had already kind of developed a little bit of a reputation. And I think the legal department was perpetually, and probably is still, a little bit concerned about the reality of that car.
Gotcha. How many? Well, so you've only owned, I believe, two Porsches, right? That one, and forgive me, was it a
I had a
turbo?
996 turbo back in the
Yeah.
day, but I only
Yeah.
had it
Yeah.
for like 6 months or something.
So how many cars have you owned in your life?
Hang on. I got a little
You have a spreadsheet?
36 cars, plus probably a couple of BS ones that didn't make the spreadsheet. Like my wife's car's not on here, but 36 cars that I intentionally went out and pursued,
Is there any car that got away?
that I didn't buy and I wish I had, or that I sold and wish I didn't.
Let's do both.
That I didn't buy and wish I had. No, I mean at this point, yes, there were. I wish I had bought a Courier GT when it was cheaper. I wish I had bought a Countach when it was cheaper. But I've been able to now go back and
Sure.
get them. Cars that I sold and wish I hadn't. Yeah, I mean, I had a Viper that I wish I had never sold, and it's an interesting thing because I kind of wax poetically about like I had a Range Rover Classic that I wish I had never sold, and I talk about that. People are like, well, you could just go buy that now,
right?
And that's true, but like there's no longer a place for them in my like I've got the cars I want, but I do look back on those and I'm like, that Viper was pretty cool. It was kind of an iconic special car that you could drive around. It was basically free to own. There were very little costs. Anyone could work on it. I enjoyed that car. But mostly no. Usually when I'm done with cars, it's like,
that's good.
Let's go. I don't ever want to be like a collector of things. That's like not my thing. I like to use my stuff. I like to get what I want out of it, and then it's time to move it on. And I usually am not particularly like sentimental once it's gone.
Do you have advice for those who do want to start collecting
cars?
Yeah.
Have a big budget. The other day totaled up what my cars cost me every year. It is, I mean, between insurance and maintenance, and I mean, if you really want to get into 7, 8 cars, it's just a lot. And I've kind of realized that that's where I hit my number. I think after that number, you start to need people. You need to like employ people. Right. And that's a level that is way beyond where I am and well beyond where most people are. And frankly, beyond what I think most people even want to be. Sure. Like, I think most people don't want to like have a guy. That's like, at that point, you have a kind of a problem. Or your collection just sits somewhere and you don't use it all that much.
It isn't enjoyed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so when do you know that it's time to sell a car then, if you're Doug DeMuro?
I don't know. It just kind of hits me. I take this summer, I spend the summer not in my house, not with my cars. And I have this barometer. If I'm not thinking about the car much over the summer.
Yeah, totally.
That happened to my Audi RS2. I got back from the summer and I was like, I didn't miss this car. Gone. That was sold 6 months later. And I'm having similar thoughts now about my convertible G-Wagon, which is a car that I've loved for a long time. But once you like have the experience, at some point, I don't want to be a guy who's got 30 cars and I'm 80 and I'm showing young people this and being like, yeah, this is cool. That's just not it's not how I like view my life.
Right. Yeah, I was going to ask you about the RS2, but that answers that. That's kind of interesting. I mean, and I think like I'm into watches a lot and stuff like that. So it's kind of like, it's a very similar mentality. If it's been in the safe for far too long, it's because I'm not wearing it. And honestly, they need to be enjoyed, And
they should be. And at that point, you kind of have two decisions. One is, do I use it more? And the other is, am I going to fundamentally change the type of person who I am? Right? Like, am I now going to start just putting it in the safe and just like keeping it there?
Right.
And for a lot of people, that's what they're into. I go to a lot of collections that have 50, 60 cars. It's very clear some of them have been driven in years. Right. And that's fine. I don't begrudge people. It's just not who I am. I would rather have be doing other things and be enjoying it in other ways.
Yeah, different strokes,
Right. I don't really care what people do. I just know what I want to do.
Yeah, 100%.
Your license plate renewal comes and you've had one come for the last 6 months in a row. And you're like, true. I don't want this anymore. Yeah. I was just reading about Elton John the other day, and apparently at his peak, he spent £1.5 million a month. And at the end of that, during his absolute heyday, at the end of that, he sold a bunch of cars and he said, I can never use them. And I was thinking, even Elton John at his peak was selling stuff because it hit even him. Like, this is stupid. What have I done here? And I used to, when I was like 15, I would respect people who had these giant collections. I want to be like that one day. And now that I'm at this age with this financial situation, it's like, I don't want to be that at all.
Right. Well, I mean, that's good that you're self-aware in that sense too, because like, sometimes, well, collectors especially, like we can convince ourselves of anything, and like, we could sell ourselves anything if you want it bad enough, you're like, oh, well, this will make sense. And there's like this mental gymnastics that you have to do that you're just like, oh, wow, you know what? I think I do need that third supercar for it to sit at home when I'm in Nantucket or whatever, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's kind of crazy. I wanted to ask you a little bit more like businessy type stuff, if I may. Like, as far as like the YouTube stuff goes, was that structured like as an, I have a million back end type of questions for this because like I've had a few YouTubers on my show and some of the stuff just like gets glazed over. Did you structure it as an LLC or like how do you structure a YouTube
That's an
channel?
interesting question. When everybody starts, they just make videos.
Right. That's what I'm
There's
saying.
no thought to like a business,
Business. Yeah.
you're just like putting up content and we'll see. And then at some point I started making enough money that I had to contact like a financial guy.
Right.
And it really an accountant. And who's also an attorney and remains my attorney. And he was like, look, you need to get a business set up. It was an S corp or whatever. I don't remember the exactitudes at that time.
Sure.
But he was like, you need to get a business set up and you need to do all this and you need to like have a business bank account and like spend money this way and deduct from, like you need to do this. This is how you need to like live. And so it took me a few years before I did that, but it also wasn't really making a ton of money for a few years. I would maybe make $2,000 a month or less, honestly, for the first few years of doing it.
Right. What's like the insurance thing? Like, how do you carry insurance when you're driving strangers' cars?
Yeah, that was a real nightmare. It was hard. I called everybody. Nobody did it. Eventually, we found a company that does production insurance.
Okay.
First me.
Yeah.
And it's expensive. And my understanding is that almost no other YouTubers carry this insurance. I've heard that Donut does, which is great. But they're also owned by legit people and like have a legit thing. We do. Yeah. Other than that, I think a lot of people are just kind of like rolling the dice, and that scares me.
Yeah. Well, as far as like ad revenue and stuff goes, I know like you've talked about how like during the holidays and such, it spikes, usually for that. But like, how do you get paid? And do you take taxes out immediately or are you 1099 or like, how does that work?
Yeah, no, you're a 1099 of YouTube. You're basically a contractor for Google.
Okay.
Which was a tough thing to explain when I bought my house. And then you work for Google? Do you have a contract? It's like, no. But you get paid once a month on YouTube and taxes aren't taken out. So you have to be cautious. And of course you have to pay quarterly. If you're self-employed and you make a certain threshold, you have to pay quarterly taxes. And so you have to be smart about that. And then there's always a big balance due at the end of the year. Or not if you made less than the previous year.
Right.
But that's how it is. And so there's some intellect required. I mean, every YouTuber you see, no matter how stupid they look, there's some like there's someone's behind them telling them, hey, you got to save this much for this month because you got to do this. Hey, you got to contribute to your IRA, your self-employed plan IRA. Hopefully, they're all doing that. Maybe not. But there's really a lot to it beyond just like money comes in and the money goes out.
Yeah, let her rip. Yeah. Okay, so to rewind a little bit, you wrote prior to your channel though. So like what made you decide to write as opposed to say staying with Porsche or whatnot?
I just was working at Porsche and it just hit me that I didn't want to wake up. I had company cars. I had 911s as company cars. It was really cool.
Wow.
But it hit me that I didn't want to wake up one day and keep renting these 911s from the company. Like I wanted my own cars and I wanted my own life. And I was young. I started at Porsche when I was 21.
Wow.
Right out of college. And I left when I was like 25. And I just realized like I'm young enough. I was lucky enough to realize what I try to counsel a lot of people to realize, which is that like I didn't really have any obligations. Like I had no mortgage, I had no kids, I had no family I was taking care of. I needed to take some risks and give something a try. And that turned out to be writing initially, and then quickly after YouTube. And I always tell everybody that exact same thing, but it's harder when you get a mortgage or a couple and kids or a couple and all this. Life is a little bit more challenging. And I still talk to people, friends of mine, acquaintances who tell me at age 35, 37, I'm going to start a business soon. And I always think to myself, that window closes. It really does. The risk becomes a lot less tenable.
Yeah. I started my business at 35. And so it's crazy.
It is. It's like a different life. And also like you're more tired.
Yes. Yeah. Oh God, I think about that all the time. And the number one regret being like the only regret I have is not having done this sooner.
Yeah.
Because I would have had more energy.
Totally. I think a lot of people say that. And I will say, like, having now done it twice between YouTube and Cars and Bids, like I'm Never. I tell everybody I'm never going to start a business again. I saw the Acquired podcast guys interviewing like the founder of NVIDIA, and they were like, tell us, like, would you do it again? Would you do anything differently? And he was like, bluntly, he was like, I would not have started this business if I knew how hard it was going to be. and he's probably a zillionaire, right?
Right.
The same. Like, screw that. I would have sat in on 9 to 5 office. That's a pretty nice life.
So so for me, it was kind of interesting because obviously as an apparel company first, podcaster second, it was kind of one of those things where people are like, dude, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't start a clothing brand. Just don't do it. It's too hard. And I was like, God, you guys are some gripey people. Like you're just
everybody says jaded. Yep.
And it's like, it's kind of, now I find myself saying it to other people. It's like, and basically my advice, and maybe, I don't know, you can weigh in on the YouTube aspect. I don't know about the cars and bids aspect, but, if you wake up every day feeling like you have to do it, like you literally can't live without doing it, like that's the reason you should do it. Not because it's like, it sounds fun or it's sexy lifestyle, because it's everything. The work is not sexy. Like none of it's sexy.
Right. Yeah. And you have to be willing to put up with that part.
Right.
In order to further it. And you're not going to want to do that unless you really love it, or unless you believe in it or whatever. I tell people that I think every job should be one of three things: either flexible, pays you a ton, or you love it. Ideally, all three.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
But one of those three, you have to hit one of those three: flexible, pays you a ton, or you love it. And if you're not hitting one of those three, you're doing it wrong.
Right.
But love in itself is kind of enough, and it'll sustain you for a while, especially if you're 25 and you don't have a lot of expenses.
Right.
But at some point, you want to move on to some of those other things too, especially if you're starting your own business.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I know like early days you were taking reader comments and stuff like that, and then you ended up buying that Ferrari 360.
Yeah.
How did you afford that? Like what? Because you were young. Like you were.
Yeah, I was 20. God, we bought it in 13. I was 25. I couldn't really afford it. I had to get my parents to co-sign a loan.
No way.
My parents didn't put any money into it, but they co-signed.
Sure.
And I put basically my entire life savings as half the down payment. It was 40 grand was half the down payment. And then my parents co-signed the rest. And it was an investment is how I looked at it. Okay. You know, back at that, first off, it was the greatest investment I ever made. It like 10,000x. But also, if you really look at it, back in the day, you could have a Ferrari on YouTube and be something. Like that was enough.
Right.
When I had that car, that was 13, right? That was like the beginning of 13. And it was like, whoa, some dude on YouTube has a Ferrari? Like, oh my God. That was like something. Now people have Bugatti. Like that's not anything anymore. Right. But at the time, it really was. It like legitimately was something. And so I kind of figured it would be popular, and it was.
That's funny. Okay, I have to know the story behind this. Like, where did that start? Was it an amalgamation thing? Was it an exaggeration over time? When you start with this on such an emphatic type of...
In those early videos, I didn't really do it much. And then... I just would say this is a whatever, like everybody does.
Right.
But then I remember where it started to expand was there were some videos where I was so either anxious or just like happy to be there that I would be like this. Like I'm next to this Bugatti. I can't just be like, this is a Bugatti. Like this. I'm so excited. And I've messed up the line by then so many times on those cars because I'm so nervous that I'm all right, take it slow, say it like enunciate it, and I think that's where it happened. And I think if you go back and look at 2 or 3 videos a year, you'll find kind of that stair step. And I bet you can even find kind of where it changed if you really wanted to see it. Although the video got posted in order, so it's not quite that simple. But that's the genesis of it.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if it just became like a mechanism for you to just like get in the groove. You know what I mean? Was there ever a time when you like really needed to get over the fact that you were in front of the camera? Yeah, my first few videos were not kind. The first video I did, I never aired, and I don't have the footage or anything, but it was a tough day. And the second video I did, which did air and is still live on YouTube, I mean, it's laughable. It's like it took time to get comfortable. And I especially had a steep learning curve or a difficulty with this because unlike a lot of YouTubers who kind of have the
luxury of like they have no audience at first and then it grows. I was
Mm-hmm.
writing on Jalopnik and I was pretty popular there. And so there was an audience from day one. And so like the
Mm-hmm.
videos couldn't be bad. Now, if you go back and watch those early videos, they are in fact bad. But by the standards of YouTube then, 10 years ago, they were totally fine. They were like totally normal. Now you
Sure.
watch them, the production quality is terrible. This is stupid. You have this iMovie music, like it's idiotic. But at that time, that was kind of what YouTube was. And so it was acceptable.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like any movie making, like, special effects is like worlds away today from where it was, I don't know, in the 60s or
Right.
something,
Right.
So it's like,
Exactly. You watch that
yeah,
stuff and you're like, this is ridiculous. But at the
yeah,
time,
right. Do you find it easier to make videos or write articles?
um, I am a better writer than I am a video person, but I've made so many videos at this point that I can knock that out with relative ease. I've got to have like 1,500 or 2,000 videos or some unbelievable amount. But I really always felt that I was a better writer, take more time, really hone in the words. I was pretty good at that, but there's not as much of a market for that anymore.
Right, right. I'm assuming your workflows changed. Like, what do you do today that you didn't do in 2013? I mean, maybe not that far back, but say 2017.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of differences. I mean, cars and bids is now a component of my life, which it wasn't back then, and that alone is a huge factor.
Sure.
Because that's like a big part of my day to day now. So that's a big difference. Also, it's just gotten easier. In 17 and 18, I would chase cars everywhere. I needed content. I was desperate. I would go anywhere. Lamborghini in Texas. All right, I'm on a plane. I mean, I was trying to grow the channel. It was a hard time actually. I
Mm-hmm.
was living in Philly, and now we have an office where there's a lot of cars stored. I show up, I shoot. It's life is easier. The videos I think are better as a result. Um, it's not quite as frenetic and as insane as it was back then.
Right.
Um, I have a little bit more time to not be as insane. But that was startup life. I mean, my channel was essentially a startup for a few years there, and it succeeded. And then that was true of cars and bids. But that's kind of how you do it. It's crazy. It's a tough period. It's an investment in your future.
Yeah, totally. Well, my understanding is Cars and Bids was sort of birthed out of the mentality of like YouTube may not last forever kind of thing, and you wanted to start a business, but why Cars and Bids given the market and the competition, or like,
I felt like there wasn't like Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace are BS. Like they're just not efficient or good ways to sell a car.
right? Okay.
Neither are Facebook groups. Like at the end of the day, that's just not right. eBay is just no good. I obviously bring a trailers there and it's excellent. And I thought to myself, we could do this for like more modern cars. We could kind of do like a more like modern focused, millennial focused, better, more usable, kind of like more engaging, modern bring a trailer. And I think that was kind of the plan. To be honest, in retrospect, I don't know if it was the right decision to start that business instead of others. Obviously, it has been very successful and it worked. So yes, you could look at it and say it was the right decision in that sense. But like, why didn't I start a detailing line? I don't know. I don't know what the hell. I took a gamble and it worked. But like, what the hell was I thinking? A marketplace is a tough business to start.
Well, also, it's kind of interesting you should say that because, like, if, like, the manual labor behind like a detail business, and I would imagine that the margin is probably not quite there. I figured a marketplace is probably really taxing financially on like the buildup of again, the website and the back end and all the, blah, blah, blahs. I'm not a tech guy. I don't think you're much of a
So
tech guy, right? So it's like all that stuff, like, it's just expensive to do something like
yeah,
that.
that's right.
But once it's built, it seems like the margins would be pretty good. There's not much work, right? I mean, photos, listing.
That's what we thought.
Okay. Okay. So where are we wrong here, Doug? Where are we wrong?
Well, it turns out that there's more to it than that. I completely agree. That's exactly what we thought. We can run this thing and run it lean. And actually, it's interesting. This is one of the reasons a lot of these other ones have failed. A lot of people have watched me show up and watched me in my stupid t-shirt and shorts and been like, that idiot can do it. I can do it. And you have no idea how many other car auction websites have started and failed in the last 3 years. Most of them don't even make it on the radar of normal people, but we pay a lot of attention to them. Some of them only get 3 cars and they're gone. Some of them last for 6 months and they're gone. But people don't realize that it's a lot more challenging than you think
Right.
to run this business. So you need support staff because not every deal goes well. You need an engineering team to continue to create and innovate different new things on the site.
Mm-hmm.
You need product managers to help. We added shipping. We now do pre-purchase inspections. We now do finance, loans. You can get loans. Like you can not do any of that stuff, but then you're at risk of competitors going away from you. There turns out to be a little bit more to it than we imagined, and so we now have 40 some employees, and so it's a lot.
So can you tell me about like how you guys conduct a PPI? Because like, just curious, who pays for that? The seller or the buyer?
Yeah, the seller pays for it. So because the seller, basically the auction lists with the pre-purchase inspection included in the auction. The seller pays for it, but it's through a third-party company that is arm's length. Like it's not the seller's company. It's not some shop he knows. I mean, the seller can include a report from some shop he knows if he wants to, but you can value that however you do. But there's a company, Lemon Squad, that basically goes around, and they can't do, I mean, like if you got an F40 and you want to know, does it have the fuel bladders replaced? They're not for that. But they can tell you if it has oil leaks. They can tell you if they think it's been hit. Like important stuff that at least gives you one more aspect of peace of mind. And we're already, of course, finding that cars with pre-purchase inspections sell for more money and get more bids, which is no surprise to anybody. But it's a worthwhile thing to do if you're gonna sell a car.
And how much does that cost?
God, I should know what the answer to that is, but I don't remember. But it's not.
That's okay. That's okay.
Maybe $100, $150 for the sellers. And we generally find it's just like hiring a pro photographer. We generally find you get that money back. I mean, you'll get that money back in one bid.
Right.
And it helps to bridge. One of the things we've learned is there's an enormous amount of users of the site, but there's not necessarily as many bidders. And I think a lot of people sit on the sidelines because they're anxious about the concept of making a car transaction online. And I think it helps to bridge some of that reticence, that like reluctance that people have. Oh, there's a pre-purchase inspection here. It's still not a fail-safe. Things still could go wrong, but it's like you combine that with Carfax, with 1,000 photos, with a great video. It's like, okay, I'm kind of getting a pretty good idea here of what I'm looking at.
Yeah, sure. Well, many people are going to be aware of the investment you guys received. Obviously, that changed things, I would imagine. Were you looking to raise capital, or did they approach you?
No, we were not. We got lucky in the sense that the right company approached us, which is a company called the Chernin Group. And their business model almost entirely relies on pursuing companies like ours that are kind of creator-led, if that makes sense. And I love that because they love it because it's a business that you don't have to buy ads to send people to. Like people come to Cars and Bids because they're fans of mine. They want to be a part of the sphere. And now, of course, it's kind of grown even beyond that. But like that's how it started, as opposed to just like marketing, spending money on marketing, and then you pull that spend back, and the company retreats, and it's like, is this even a business? Like if we, but not having to spend a ton of money on marketing and just have like a figurehead who people love at the head of a business is a good thing. And so they came to us and they said, this looks like the type of business that we invest in. Would you have a conversation with us? And we said no many times. But at the end of the day, they knew what they were looking at and what they were looking for. We didn't think we were ready for an investment yet. We thought we could continue to grow it a little bit more before we went down that road. But I'm glad we did. I think they found the right people in us, and I think we found the right people in them, and I think it was the right decision.
Is that a function of timing, you think, that you feel that way?
I think it's more a function of just like the type of businesses they seek out and the type of and the way they run things.
Almost like a trust thing.
Yeah, I was always wary of having to have some faceless private equity firm come in and have no concept of how YouTube works, and they could be like, great, you're doing this, now let's whatever. I mean, you could imagine, right, how some horrible private equity company would be like, now you're going to review cars by looking at their Cars and Bids listing, or some dumb thing that would never make sense to anybody, but it's the kind of thing private equity would think of. And they came and they were like, they got it. They like got it from day one. And so I didn't ever have to do any of that annoying explaining.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, no, that's really great. What did some of that money go towards, like, immediately? Is that hiring people? Was it expand? Like,
yeah, we hired out kind of like a sales support staff to like go outreach to dealers and get more dealers on board with our site. Engineering, so to like build more product stuff, like adding things like shipping and finance. And just like generally more support. We like really we don't really advertise this, but we really pride ourselves on having a lot of support. So if your auction does go bad or if something does happen, we have people you can call and talk to. And I think that's kind of a big deal. It's a little bit of a weird world out there in the online buying and selling sphere. And so it's nice to know that there's like someone who cares about you.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of investments in that sort of thing.
How has your role changed?
My role is thankfully changed in the sense that I no longer have to like I make YouTube videos as a profession, you know, like right. I shouldn't be like making hiring decisions. Like, right. I think it's insane how the last couple of years have gone. Like, I don't belong like forecasting growth. Right. That isn't the world in which I live. So it's been nice to hire people to do that who like are real, who like that's their job. So like the company doesn't feel like an early stage startup anymore. It still feels like a startup, but it's more mature than it was. And that's a good thing. And it allows me to focus on the thing that I'm actually good at, which is making car. And that's the way I'll most benefit the company.
Yeah, sure. Well, aside from cars, you don't strike me as anybody that's like really into gear, like cameras, or we've already talked, like you're not a watch guy, for example. I know you collect low number license plates. And for those who don't know what that is, it's literally the minimal literal number that you can get on like a license plate that isn't 7 digits. It's 1 digit and it's a 0 or it's a 1. Like, yeah. So aside from your quirky little license plate collection on your wall, which I think is, I love it. I absolutely love it. Is there anything you're into that not many people know about?
I have an enormous amount of varied and bizarre interests. I love old homes. That's probably one of my very biggest. I own 2 very old homes. I love them. I think they're really special. Our house on the East Coast is like a Victorian, and I'm obsessed with it.
Interesting.
I love to travel. I am obsessed with travel. We travel as much as humanly possible. A lot of people say that, but I've like really lived it in a crazy way. We took my son who's 2 has been on like 64 airplanes or something like that. And I have another son born here in a couple of months, and
congrats.
Thank you. He's going to Europe in May, even though he hasn't even born yet. And it's only 5 months from now.
How do you get a passport for an unborn child? How does that work?
Okay. Here's what you do. You schedule the appointment the moment the kid is born, and then you go in and you take a picture. And it's actually funny. My son who's 2 has this because we took him to Europe when he was first born. And you get a picture, and there's a baby picture, right? There's a passport photo, but then it's valid for 5 years. So he's 55. He's 2. He doesn't look a thing like he does in the passport picture. And it's ridiculous. You could never identify from this photo, but that's like the only way you can do it. So
that's hilarious. Oh my gosh.
I'm obsessed with travel. I have a lot of different weird little hobbies. I'm obsessed with the 2008 economic recession. There's a lot housing policy. There's a lot of music, as we briefly touched on. I have a lot of weird personal interests.
Wait, so how do you delve further into 2008?
Oh man, what an interesting situation that was. I've read all the books about it, and I'm obsessed with all the players in it. And I think that some of those guys saved our country and changed the course of America in a great way forever. But that's a whole other conversation. Wow. And someone plunged us into that.
Okay, so I'm obviously in North Carolina at the moment, as I told you, at my parents'. When I get back to San Diego, I'm dying to have this conversation with you. Because I can't, this is
I just think Ben Bernanke and Hank Paulson were the right guys in the right time. And if we hadn't had them, I worry what might have happened. Wow, we got lucky. As bad as it was, we got lucky.
Absolutely fascinating. Is there a business maybe like when you were a kid or something that you're like, man, I've always wanted to do this? Because I doubt you grew up like wanting to be a YouTuber, obviously, right?
No, so I didn't. Even as it blew up, I didn't really want to.
Is there something you haven't started that you think you might in the future?
I always just wanted to work with cars, and I'm thrilled that I was able to and am able to. And no, I will never start another business again as long as I live.
Really?
It's just too hard, and I don't need to, and I'm done. I just can't explain how hard it is. And there's a couple ideas I have in my mind, like I could do that, and I'm just like, no. I will say it was kind of good timing, this whole investment, because it took some stuff off my plate, and I have my son who's 2 and another one coming. And
Right.
that was, I have a suspicion that when my kids are 13 and they don't want to be around dada, you're done working. My son yells every day when I come downstairs. I have a suspicion that I will maybe then think about, okay, should I start something again? But I'm
Yeah.
talking 10, 12 years from now. I'm not doing anything.
I mean, okay, well, I want to bet $100 right now you are, because you're 2 for 2, and that ain't gonna go away.
But there's a loss of motivation at some point.
Yeah.
It's very rare that people really are able to do it successfully so many times. And once you get into your 40s and you got some millions in your pocket, you don't have that like hunger. Like when I started this, I didn't come from money. Like I didn't have money. I like was eager to like prove myself and be successful. And in many ways I've done that, and it's like, well, I don't know that the drive is there. I would do it again if I had great partners, for sure. I think that's a component of it. But even then, it's like, I don't think I would be the same person I was before. I would definitely look different for me. I would have to just kind of be a figurehead whose name is on it, like Trump, right? Like, and not actually be like doing the work of building the building.
So you're gonna start a private equity firm, and
I would never. Those guys, they have the hardest jobs in the world trying to pick these companies. And
I have a couple of opinion-based questions for you. What's wrong with the car industry?
um
Let's call it opportunities for improvement.
opportunities for improvement for the car industry. I think a lot of people would want me to say the dealership model. I think it's more complicated than people realize.
Yeah.
I think the automakers are not obsessed with the concept of being dealers themselves. I think there's an enormous amount of effort that would go into that. And I think the dealership model isn't as bad as people think, in part because that's how all other products work generally.
Mhm.
Um, and it's just building a dealership network is really, really hard. It's
Yeah.
the reason that a lot of foreign brands have never come to America. It does not have to do with regulation. It has to do with the fact that there are 50 states, 300 million people, and there's 3,000 miles apart. Um, and so I don't think that's one of the things that's broken in the car industry. I do think like there's becoming a weird thing with EVs and fuel and what's going to happen next and where to go next. And maybe we've pushed too hard on EVs, maybe we haven't. I think that I'm not exactly sure what's broken here, but it does strike me as a little strange that you can still buy a 7,000 pound GMC Yukon that gets 12 miles per gallon, while some people are going fully electric, and the government seems to be pushing that, but people don't necessarily want it at the same clip. And I'm not exactly sure where that's all going to go.
Mhm.
That'll be interesting, but I don't know. It's hard to assess what's wrong with the car industry. It's a great question. Um, I'm almost too in it, you know.
Right. Yeah. Well, what do you find that collectors and or enthusiasts often get wrong when they're starting out? Because like in the watch world, they say, the first 10 watches you buy are just there's stupid purchases. Like,
Interesting,
because
because
you have to
you're not
sort of,
refined enough.
yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Like you'll refine your taste and that sort of thing, which actually that begs the question, which I thought I had written down, but I didn't, but I'm glad I just remembered, with the Doug score. Okay. So when was your first Doug score?
We launched it in the summer of 17.
Okay. So it's 6 years old, right? 6.5 almost, call it. As you refine your tastes, doesn't that affect the Doug score?
Yeah. And in that video where I launched it, I said then that I would be revising them as I went around.
Okay.
I mean, you're forgiven for not knowing that. I haven't reminded people of that since then, and I
okay.
probably should. It's been 6.5 years since I launched it, and one of my tenets of it was over time I will revise the scores. The C8 Corvette had a 10 in cool factor when it first came out. Well, now it's like a 6. We see them everywhere, right? And I've revised that. But I think people don't realize that I'm doing that, but it does happen.
Well, I mean, Doug, the Standard Age podcast is nothing if not just a service, a public service announcement.
I am announcing it for the second time in 6.5 years. Yes, I do sometimes revise the Doug score.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's funny. Yeah, I'm
because I think, at some point, yeah, the cars aren't as cool. And one of the components of the score is technology. And
Yeah.
obviously, the tech changes, and a car that was a 9 5 years ago is a 7 now.
Sure. Yeah.
But in terms of what enthusiasts get wrong,
Yeah.
I think that I don't know. I have this big thing about how you should buy special cars versus new cars. People come to me at Cars and Coffee and like, should I get a 488 or a McLaren 720S? And I want to be like, neither.
I don't care.
Get a Ford GT. You should get a 993 Turbo. You should get a car that's going to hold its value and be special. Like a McLaren 720S, in my mind, is not a special car. It may become one someday. Cars that are not special sometimes do become special later. But like right now, it's just another mass-produced automatic supercar that's like rich guys buy because they're not interesting.
Yeah.
However, a 993 Turbo, a Ford GT, for the same money, those are special cars. A 997 GT3, like those are special cars. A Murcielago, which is only 200 grand, by the way. People are out there buying 48s for 350 when you could go buy a Murcielago. It makes no sense to me. Anyway, though that's one of the things that I think enthusiasts get wrong. I think a lot of people think that the way into the car hobby is just like go to the dealer and buy something fast for 300 grand. And that, to me, that doesn't get a lot of respect from me. Right. I've always said that certain things are the difference between rich and interesting. And you want to be on the rich and interesting spectrum of things.
Yeah.
A rich dude with a new Ferrari. That's not like something.
Right. And it doesn't exactly, it's like you can't buy taste. You know what I mean? Like it's
right. That's exactly right.
Same breath, you know?
And I watch a lot of these people and they brag, oh, I got the newest this, the newest that. And it's like,
congratulations. Yeah.
That's not all you needed to do. That was be rich.
Right.
And which in itself is something, but there's a lot of ways you can just prove to people that you're rich. That's not something to me.
A deep pocket doesn't mean you have a brain. Like, you know.
Yeah, and it's not cool. Being rich on its face is not cool.
Right.
In my opinion. Doing something cool is cool. Restoring a house. That's cool.
It's funny, a 993 Turbo is like one of my grail cars. I can't afford one or else I would buy one. But you said that you had a lot of 911s, or at least a couple. Do you have a favorite 911 of all time?
There's only two 911s that I like truly love and want to own: 993 Turbo and a 996 GT2. There's a lot of other ones that I really like, but 993 Turbo and 996 GT2, I suspect I will own in the next.
Oh my God. What color 993 Turbo? I have to know.
Arena only. Okay. I shouldn't say that. That's going to jack up.
Yes. Arena only. Don't do it.
I'll delete it.
I always buy my cars in the colors on the ads. Like always, every car I've ever bought has been like the color in the ad or the press pictures or whatever.
Sure.
And of course, the famous ad, I mean, one of the most famous ads of all time was the 993 Turbo kills bugs fast Arena Red ad.
Oh man, that's great. That's so good. I mean, I'd love that car in silver, but I think a roof 993 is kind of also a grail. But you know,
I don't screw with modified stuff, and everybody's like, "No, roof is its own thing." But to me, it's like,
yeah.
Is it? Really?
I understand. I totally do. My concern is the maintenance though. You know what I mean? Like, let alone storage, obviously. But like, what's your pick for a vintage / neo vintage driver's car requiring as little maintenance as humanly possible? Or at least the least number of headaches, you think?
The term vintage and like low maintenance are almost like
antithetical.
This is one of the things I try to tell people. Like, you think you want a vintage car, you don't know, you think it looks cool, but when you're actually responsible for it, it's a whole other situation that you don't realize.
Yep.
But there are some that are easier. Older Mercedes tend to be pretty easy because Mercedes supports them. There's parts available for all of them. That's kind of true of older Porsches as well. Porsche does a good job supporting them, but they're less reliable. But like an old Pagoda SL or a 300 SL Gullwing, incredibly expensive car, but Mercedes-Benz is fanatical about making sure that all parts are available for that car. And they're pretty easy to drive. But just older Mercedes in general are pretty easy, older Porsches. But I would caution anyone who wants to like use a vintage car. It's a lot. I have this Countach. I'm driving this Countach all the time. It's an experience. It's definitely not like a modern car. You will not have a push button start, get in. And honestly, I've noticed several people have gotten out of Countaches lately, including the guy that I bought mine from. His collection was all modern supercars except the Countach. He had it on his bedroom wall. He wanted one. And then he realized he wasn't ready for it, I guess, is a diplomatic way of saying it. It wasn't like the right. He wanted cars he could push a button, and if they failed, he sent them off to the dealership, and this wasn't that.
Right. Two last questions. What are a few of your favorite quirks of all time?
Oh God, There's so many. I mean, it's tough to really say, but when I think back on some of my favorite ones, the Vector W8 has a gauge pod that looks like it's basically from a fighter jet. It's like fighter jet technology from the late 80s, and it's incredible. The Aston Martin Lagonda's odometer is under the hood. I mean, that is just one of that car had a ton of bizarre things, but that is one of the all-time greats. God, there are a ton that I really would have to think through.
The Lagonda is pretty special.
Yeah, that car was just, but like there are some that are really, really, really cool. Other interesting quirks. God. Every year I do a Quirk of the Year award. The Nissan Maxima that talked to you, I really liked that. The Fiat Multiple that has 3 seats in front, 3 individual bucket seats in front, the BMW iX with its self-healing grille. There's a ton, but every year I do like a Quirk of the Year award, and I go through and like find my top 10 quirks and give like the #1 quirk award. Let me see what else has been on this.
Okay, hold on. For those who are listening, Doug just basically opened up what I'm assuming is an Excel sheet or something.
Yeah.
What are you looking at right now?
I'm looking at an Excel sheet to try to remember my awards.
So is this just living on your desktop where you could just, it's there?
Yeah, I have like an Excel sheet that kind of runs my life generally. Although now I can't find this particular thing. But
that's so great.
But yes, generally speaking, I do. But I'm trying to think of other incredible quirks. Those are a lot. Those are a couple of them though, but there are so many. There are so many ones.
Right. Sure. Yeah. I mean, after thousands of cars.
Right. It's hard to think of them.
I ask this a lot, and it's usually the last question. What is the last thing you did for the very first time?
It's interesting. The most recent thing I did for the first time.
Yeah.
Buying the Countach was I bought a vintage car for the first time. That was a big deal. That was like 2 months ago.
Oh yeah, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because by definition, that's a vintage car. Yeah, that's true. Because
and I had never owned anything that old or even close before. Yeah, it's a vintage car now. Of course, to us, it's like, that's 40. It's 40 years old.
Saying a lot about our own age, right? Like we're dating ourselves. That's sufficient, and that's a big one.
Important one. Yeah.
Yeah. I really appreciate you taking the time, man. This was fun for me.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed it. It was a quick hour, and I tried to keep it at an hour.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. We're going to the racetrack tomorrow, and I have to load all my cars on a transporter. Oh. And I'm terrified about this racetrack day. You might be the last person to ever talk to me. No, I'm kidding. Oh, no. I'm gonna be safe.
What track are you going to?
To Chuckwalla.
Chuckwalla, yeah. Are you going with like the Garage Collective guys?
No, just a couple. My buddies and I discovered it's not all that expensive to run out of track midweek. It's like $4,000, and if you split it, it's really not such a bet. So then we got wind of this at Cars and Vids, and we were like, hey, maybe we can do some videos. And then there was like, will you pay for it? And it's like, yeah, okay, well, now let's go.
Oh, sweet.
Where we are now. So.
Oh, that's great. Okay, I'll let you go, man. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you,
buddy.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
Right.
See you later.
Bye.
This wraps up this episode of the Standard H podcast. If you like what you heard, I'd love it if you'd share it with a friend or two. And if you have a moment, please rate and review the show, as it helps others discover these episodes. It absolutely helps far more than you realize. Shout out to Jensen Reed and Super Beautiful for the theme track. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.